Dear friends, my name is Karen Williams, and here I am to tell you the truth about The Alchemist. Just so that you know it's me, here I am. There is a face to this video, and now let's return to my computer screen. Here we have a quote by the famous Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, and he says, "There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true." This is the heart of this video for you, because I want to be able to demonstrate to you that the movie makers who want to make the movie of The Alchemist have been fooled, along with all the readers of The Alchemist. And they've been fooled in the first way, because they are believing what isn't true. But it's not their fault, because they haven't been given the truth. And I am about to give you that truth. The person who has withheld the truth about The Alchemist from the movie makers and also all the readers of The Alchemist is Paulo Coelho himself. Now, he's not a bad man, but he's a very famous man, and I think fame can be a trap. So let me now demonstrate to you what is true, and I hope that you can believe it and not fall into the trap of refusing to believe what is true. Let's go to the trailer of The Alchemist, which has been made by Will Smith and Kevin Frakes.
The Alchemist was really my first literary love affair. The concept of Santiago having a dream and risking everything to realize that dream really just blasted my mind open.
Well, hopefully this video I'm making will blast your minds open, and I hope it will blast Will Smith's mind open, because here is the truth. This is a quote by Paulo Coelho. He says, "You have to take risks. We will only understand the miracle of life fully when we allow the unexpected to happen." Now, in his youth, Paulo Coelho was a tremendous risk taker, and he lived by this axiom. But as he became famous and as he became older, he stopped being a risk taker. And so therefore, he didn't want to know the miracle of life, and he wouldn't allow the unexpected to happen. Now, the unexpected that happened to Paulo Coelho was me. This is a photograph of myself with Paulo Coelho taken in 2008. But I had contacted Paulo Coelho in 2002 by writing a letter to Brazil. You see, what I had discovered was that The Alchemist had happened to me in real life. I had been living in Andalusia in 1995 in the countryside next to a magical ruin. And one night, after coming down from my ruin, I had an incredible dream. And that dream took me to Tarifa and Tangiers, just like Santiago in The Alchemist. And then I crossed a desert and finally found myself in a land of pyramids. At the land of pyramids, I was given a beating by somebody. And then after that, I was given my treasure. Now, between 2003 and 2009, I sent Paulo Coelho many emails, letters, and even maps of where The Alchemist took place. In fact, I can show you that map. It's by the side of my computer, and that is where I lived in Andalusia. And if I zoom in, you can see where the R is, that is where the ruins stood on a hill near my parents' house. So that is where The Alchemist began, in Andalusia. Now, back to the computer screen. But by the time I started really sending Paulo concrete information about The Alchemist and its true meaning, this was in 2004, Paolo had stopped taking risks. Let's see another quote. When we least expect it, life sets us a challenge to test our courage and willingness to change. At such a moment, there is no point in pretending that nothing has happened or in saying that we are not yet ready. The challenge will not wait. Life does not look back. A week is more than enough time for us to decide whether or not to accept our destiny. Paulo Coelho. Well, in this quote, Paulo says that a week is more than enough time for us to decide whether or not to accept our destiny. When I arrived on the scene and started communicating with him, I was that unexpected challenge. I was the test for him. But unfortunately, 16 years later, not 1 week later, but 16 years later, Paulo has still refused the challenge that I set him. And that challenge was to understand that he had channeled the story from an invisible spiritual realm. He had predicted the future, and that future had happened to someone in real life. That person was me. But that is not the important part. The important part is that it allowed me to discover the true meaning of the alchemist. And that true meaning I gave to Paulo over and over and over again, year after year after year, for more than 16 years. Now, the true meaning of The Alchemist is that it is not the story of one hero, Santiago, and his dream and his treasure. It is the story of two heroes. Now, this isn't rocket science, but I discovered this on my journey. The two heroes in the book are Santiago and the leader of the refugees who beats Santiago at the end of the story. Now, so there are two heroes, there are two treasures, and there are two dreams. Santiago has a dream, and the leader of the refugees has a dream. And Santiago finds his treasure, but what Paulo Coelho does not say is that the leader of the refugees also finds his treasure. Now, I have written a short story, Anwar's story, in which I describe how the leader of the refugees finds his own treasure. Now, why are there two heroes in The Alchemist? But before I answer that question, let's go to something else. This is part of the interview that Paulo gave to Oprah Winfrey in 2014 in his flat in Geneva. Now, by this time, Paulo knew that I had given him the true meaning of The Alchemist and had also told him that he had channeled the book from an invisible realm. So let's listen to what Paulo has to say.
It's quite difficult to explain, but Oprah, you want to know, did I write The Alchemist? I'm not sure.
I think you need to hear that again, because what Paulo was doing in this interview was throwing Oprah a curved ball. Never in a million years did she expect him to say anything like this. And as you will see when I show you the section again, you will see that Oprah's face is really quite aghast. So let's play it again.
It's quite difficult to explain, but Oprah, you want to know, did I write The Alchemist? I'm not sure. I'm sure that I was a good instrument. That I went through all these ordeals in my life, totally crazed, outcast, whatever you mentioned, I was there. And then one day I write this book that it is, let's be honest, much better than I am.
So there we have two quasi-confessions from Paulo. But Oprah, you want to know, did I write The Alchemist? I'm not sure. And then he says that the book is much better than him. The backstory to this, of course, is that For 8 years, Paolo had been receiving emails from me where I was giving him the true meaning of The Alchemist and also telling him that it had happened to me in real life. So by 2014, when he gave this interview, he had quite a bad conscience about all of this. He hadn't been able to take those risks he had talked about. He hadn't been able to open himself to the miracle of life, and he hadn't been able to allow the unexpected to happen. So it was no surprise or no wonder that he made this quasi-confession to Oprah. But let's go back to what I had on the screen beforehand. Sorry, this one. This is a section of that interview with Oprah, and in it, Oprah says, "All right, so when you were younger, you wrote this in your diary. Every day it seems harder to achieve my great ideal, to be famous and respected, to be the man who wrote the book of the century, the thought of the millennium and the history of humanity." This is important because you may think that I'm criticizing Paolo freely and have no kind of sympathy for him. I do have sympathy for him, but I also agree with all this statement he made. I agree that he did write the book of the century, but in writing the book of the century, he wasn't the only participant in that process. I was the other participant. And now let's go back to why there are two heroes in The Alchemist and not one. There are two heroes because Santiago is in search of the treasure of his higher self. He is in search of truth, love, light, patience, all of these qualities of the spirit. But in order to find these things in himself, he has to encounter his darkness. In other words, he will not find any light or any treasure until he first confronts his darkness. Now, how does he confront that darkness? Well, the story is a classic case of mirroring. Santiago, at the end of the book, is beaten by the leader of the refugees, and that leader is Santiago's mirror. He mirrors Santiago's own darkness. And when Santiago experiences a sudden epiphany in which he realizes that his darkness can never bring him any kind of peace, love, contentment, or can never bring him to his higher self, that is when he confesses to the leader of the refugees that he is looking for treasure. In other words, he abandons his search for treasure. And in that moment, the leader of the refugees is able to give Santiago his treasure. The two men are mirrors for each other. The leader of the refugees is a mirror for Santiago, and Santiago equally is a mirror for the leader of the refugees. And that is the reason why there are two heroes, two dreams, and two treasures. Now here I am showing you an illustration of the hero's journey. Now the part of the hero's journey that Paulo Coelho didn't cover in The Alchemist were the last two sections, bringing forth the hero and sharing the elixir. Basically, the alchemist stops at the 10th stage, which is the road back. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because Will Smith refers to The Alchemist as a classical hero's journey, and it is. But I want to talk about the 11th stage, bringing forth the hero, which is something which I experienced in my own hero's journey. Now, let me go back to the camera so that you can see me. This section of the hero's journey is often referred to as the resurrection. Sorry, I was just fiddling with the computer. Now, there is a section on the internet which describes bringing forth the hero or resurrection. And it says, the hero faces the resurrection, his most dangerous meeting with death. This battle is for much more than the hero's life. Other lives or an entire world may be at stake. Now, this final part of the hero's journey, which is not included in The Alchemist, as this quotation says, is the hero's most dangerous meeting with death. When Santiago meets the leader of the refugees and is beaten by his gang, this is an encounter with death. In other words, Santiago sees death very close, and in so doing decides that this path of death cannot lead him to his treasure. Now, that death Santiago experiences is the death of his ego. But in the last stage of the hero's journey, the resurrection phase involves a second confrontation with death. And this time it is the test for the hero to pass. The hero must show the universe and must show the world that he has learned all the lessons on the journey and that he is now willing to live for others and not for himself. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because my test came in the form of a cancer. I was diagnosed with that cancer and I was given the truth that I needed chemotherapy and radiotherapy. I had my first section of chemotherapy and then I came down with a terrible bout of flu which lasted for a month, so I missed 2 chemos. Now, when I returned to the oncologist after the flu, she surprised me with a final test, and this was my resurrection test. She said to me, Karen, I have to say that you have a choice. You don't have to necessarily carry on with this chemo as you've missed 2 chemos already. And the reason is that we have no proof whatsoever that the chemotherapy we are giving you has any effect on the cancer you have. There is very little statistical evidence to show that this kind of chemo works because the cancer you have is extremely rare. So can you make a decision now as to whether or not you want to continue with the chemo? I had literally seconds to decide what to do. And what swayed it for me? Well, it was what the oncologist said to me. She said, Karen, there is very little statistical evidence that this chemotherapy works for your cancer. What was I supposed to do? I suppose in a way, after years and years of questing, I suddenly realized that I had a chance to do something, if not for myself, for humanity. So I said to her, okay, I'll carry on. I'll do the chemotherapy because then you will have my stats. You will have the statistical evidence from me. So in other words, what happened was that I undertook the resurrection phase of the hero's journey, and I brought forth the hero inside me. Sorry, the screen just went blank. As the text that I quoted earlier said, in the resurrection phase, this is a battle for much more than the hero's life. Other lives or an entire world may be at stake. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, because other lives are at stake. And a whole world is at stake. When the movie makers make the movie of The Alchemist, currently they have no idea that it is the story of 2 heroes, 2 dreams, and 2 treasures. And so they will be making a movie where they are only telling half the story. I am here as a messenger to tell them the truth. And by telling them the truth, I am activating my hero, and I am saying, this is something I offer you. This is something I offer you, the movie makers, you, the fans of The Alchemist, and the world. I came back with treasure, and I am offering you the treasure of truth and what I discovered. Let's have a look at a little bit more of the trailer.
I realized that the book itself is a living, breathing organism. It's like a work of art. Two people can look at the same work of art and they can have completely different interpretations.
That is Kevin Frakes, who's written the screenplay for the movie and also will be directing the movie. And I have to contradict Mr. Frakes. Yes, you can look at a movie and have all sorts of different feelings about it, but you cannot have multiple interpretations of the story. The story means only one thing. It means a search for redemption, a search for the death of the ego, and a search for the higher self. So let's go back to Paulo in his interview with Oprah Winfrey. I am not suggesting that Paulo Coelho is a bad man. What I am suggesting is that he is probably a victim of his fame. And fame is something very fickle. It is sometimes a gilded cage from which the bird trapped inside the cage cannot escape. And by not being able to escape, that bird cannot sing freely and cannot tell the truth. So it has fallen upon me, being not famous and being not in a gilded cage of fame, to tell you all the truth. Let's listen to Paulo once more.
Prophecy is quite difficult to explain, but Oprah, you want to know, did I write The Alchemist? I'm not sure.
No, in that interview, he couldn't bring himself to say, no, I didn't write it. I partially wrote it, and the vast majority of the book was channeled from an invisible spiritual realm. So it is my hope that Paulo can escape his gilded cage of fame and join me in telling the truth about The Alchemist. As I said, when I had my cancer, I was faced with a choice. Did I do the chemotherapy or didn't? I was faced with the unexpected, and I was faced with a risk, just as Paulo talked about the unexpected and also risks. And my hero's journey allowed me to make the right decision, to provide more statistics for other people so that when they receive their treatment, there will be greater knowledge about whether this particular chemo worked. Thank you for listening. I'm still here after 8.5 years, and perhaps the chemo did work, but I'm here to tell you the truth. So God bless and thank you.